Chili here with Sirius Talis Moon. And first of all, I want to honor my 18 subscribers. I have no idea how you got here, but I'm very grateful. And having an election with a 12th house Rahu, and I think it was Venus as well, um, was probably conspicuous for a channel, but I like it that people somehow reach my content, and I hope that um, they are enjoying that or that resonates. This is Mercury hour. Mercury is 24 degrees Scorpio, applying to oppose Uranus. The moon is at the second house, ascendant ruled by Mercury, midheaven ruled by Jupiter. I am sitting here with my Vetiver Blue Lotus oil. Um, It is not a promotion, it's not on sale or anything. However, I do like the conjoining of these two oils and a little bit about vetiver. So I want to talk today about flooded villages and illegal tree cutting in Europe and contemplation about the type of companies that have no owners that you can Google. Okay, I saw it with AI companies, and I want to do a little bit of a thinking together with you. So I'm going to touch on the topic of organized crime, but also unregistered births and people that have been that have had financial violence against them, and they need actually to somehow make money and have difficulty being registered. So the duality of registration and versus organized crime when it comes to these type of companies. And it's even an astrology company. So shout out to Light, and she had began to work with Authority Astrology. I don't know the company at all because I don't know who are the owners, and that prompted that topic. And I also want to do a thinking together with you around the course of information and connect it to um, sexual sovereignty and how sexual sovereignty is imperative to cohesive information, but also the use of information benevolently. Um, Now, back to my vetiver and black and blue lotus. Um, yes, black moon lilith is still opposing Uranus. Vetiver is, together with patchouli, is one of the essential oils that grow like wine. What do I mean by that? The older they get, the better they get. And one of the things that I was recommended when I was taught aromatherapy um, was to buy 2 bottles of patchouli and vetiver, and one is for use and the other one to put it away for at least a year. And it has been, I think, the first year I'm following this advice, and I found that to be interesting. So I use my, let's say, old vetiver, and then I do a mix of the new and the old, and I'll see what happens with that. Okay, I need to do the same with the patchouli. Patchouli I used in the blend that I made for myself when I experimented with channeling, and that was used for wealth that stands the test of time. So this is a very grounding oil, very good for the skin. And by the way, when I traveled. I was homeless in Netherlands, okay? Um, but also, um, I did have the chance to see the country, and from a lady that was homeless herself, she had a bottle of vetiver, and she let me smell that when we were hiding in the bathroom because of the cold, and we didn't want to go outside. And she was there with her dog, so that was quite interesting how that oil came to me and managed to provide grounding, um, balance to the nervous system within the cold, the homelessness, the and hiding in a secluded place because I didn't know what to do for an entire day in the cold, and we weren't allowed to work or anything like that. So um, that is vetiver, uh, and another oil that I combine is blue lotus. Now, blue lotus is fascinating because it's one of the oils most associated with Egypt, um, and it has the wisdom of the beauty that is growing in a swamp. Now, I know that the flower oils, particularly blue lotus, are very associated with eroticism, seduction, and so on. But this is absolutely not how I use blue lotus. So the combination of the two is grounding with increased psychic awareness. And attempts at the throat chakra as I speak. Um, what I love about the combination of these oils is the connotation to both sensual life energy and nervous system alignment, embodiment, and groundedness, which can only come and arise and bring in support with sexual sovereignty. Now, here is the thing. I don't know about the process of making these oils all the way to my hands. However, I do know that the process of transmutation is also to reach the processes of production from the growing to the harvesting to the shipping to the sales and to the production of these oils sovereignly. Okay, so with sexual sovereignty on the reign of life, and that is at the foundation of free trade, which can explain why these are not for sales just yet, as there are energies that I'm working with. Now, um, we have to understand that while the essential oil is the essence of the planet, the Pluto part of the planet, the concentrated form, the attempt to corrupt the essence is why we have sexual boundary violations in agrarian, and this leads in agrarian and trade and a lot of places that lead me to the next point. It will begin with forestry and end with artificial intelligence and even astrology. So I saw a video from, going to connect to the sources that inspired this video. What I love about the Age of Air is the transparency, and this is where the natural tendency of mine to not hide my sources, I guess it's a costume from journalism, So this is a lady that's the Faces Over the Authority Astrology channel, but it's not listed who are the founders, who is the um, owner, um, and it's marketed as a program where when one does not depend on the person to have a reading, which I love. That being said, I'm going to touch on the information issue, not because it's unique to that, but because it's a great time to talk about the way that businesses need to trade information, okay, with governments and or intelligences. Um, and this is also why I talk about the age of air and transparency around this topic, because even as I'm speaking with you, or as I'm, printing a chart information in either an astrology program or an astrology website, this is information. This information is transparent. The myth of encryption is is not relevant when it comes to energy reading and a psychic reading, and those things are definitely utilized globally. So I do not promise the myth of privacy when I cannot grant it. And this is another thing that is affecting my praxis. The channel is called Fault Line. It's why Europe's forests are vanishing. They took the study case of Romania, and they basically saw illegal tree cutting and how there was an entire silence all across the board, with all enforcing, governing, and juristic forces. And it brings me to the point where, as I was digging my half moons, one of the things that I received was that the moons contained everything, and that included the ritual abuse. And there was anger of the ritually abused in the forests. And this brings me to the topic of, um, first of all, it was awareness, because as I was taking action to reforest, the things that would challenge would would rise to the surface for me to address and understand how did the forest become a desert. And I did predict that, and I see that this is happening in Europe, because ritual abuse is basically disconnecting people, young children, from nature and from a sense of connectedness. Okay? Whether it's the ways of the old, whether it's and the issue about ritual abuse is that it makes everything to nothing. And that is even the point of that is to basically create no meaning, and then people are subjected to mind control and to be and to the artificial creation. And I don't mean artificial as technology, thank you, but actually artificial. Yeah, the light is on, and I need to turn the lights on. My sense is we're more, I guess, acutely aware when the light was natural, which means lights off. Can, it's okay, thank you. Yeah, when you answer your parent haphazardly and end up dealing with the results. Um, so, um, when it comes to the ritual abuse, so it's done as wealth consolidation, and basically it allows the people that are the output of this abuse, okay, um, uh, to be so disconnected that they would use both legal and illegal tree cutting in a way that is not in alignment with people living with nature. What do I mean by that? It's going to be an either or, And this is where what we see when we come to see the flooded villages that become water reservoir for the cities that nobody can walk in. Okay, the 15-minute cities. Um, and a big shout out to another person that prompted me to talk about this, and this is, I shared her post online. Um, Carla VTF de Cruyff, and she talks about the 15-minute cities. She gives the study case of Nederland, and she talks about Utrecht, Amersfoort, and Amsterdam, and the combination of high prices for public transportation and parking, okay, juxtaposed with no parking spots. And parking spots were, in general, I remember I saw, the Tesla being 2 seconds from the canal when I was in Netherlands. Like, how do these people even park to begin with? But definitely, um, if we juxtapose uh, the cutting of the trees and the disappearance of the forests, that could not have been allowed without the ritual abuse that was done in the forest and created the disconnect of both people and nature by placing it as an either or when it comes to people and nature, which allowed to flood villages as supposed water reservoirs, and then those villages, they lose their homes and they come to live in the cities, and in the cities they don't actually have transportation, and it creates the lack of freedom and mobility, which is essential to balancing the nervous system. Okay, both rest and movement are required for a good balanced nervous system, and this creates behavioral issues. Okay, so that's something, it's a fantastic post to read. Um, so less mobility, less car usage, more behavioral disorder, more dependence on your neighbor, which can bring a sense of community in the beginning, but it becomes a ghetto very soon after, because a sense of community can only happen with the right to mobility. Okay, and when we're not talking about the Uganda village, okay, shout out to Akech Joy, okay, who's showing us a model of Ugandan village where there is community life. These people, they don't walk in soil that balances their nervous system. They walk on stone that can be flooded at any time. Um, okay, the houses in Netherlands are originally built with several stories, not up to 3 stories, but this is where the flood would come to the first floor, and the important things would be in the second and third, so people would climb up to the third floor and sustain the flood. And this is why the floating houses are the most expensive real estate when it comes to private sector housing. So yes, now when people would want to escape the ghetto, they would not be able to hide in the forests as my grandfather did, um, but actually, because the forests are cut. So what is there to do? Well, what created these policies, this decision making? And if that's not enough, then by 2030, which I talk about astrologically, and this is already my contribution, 2030, we're going to have Ketu, which is the eclipses, Saturn and Uranus conjoining in Gemini, which means the bombing of the 15 minutes ghetto cities. Okay? Ketu is purging the physical manifestation of. For example, I have Ketu in my 10th house, and I grew up with mainly one of my parents. And not only that, um, career, while I have been, I've had work experience in various sectors, career has been something that, even when I look at astrology, most of my astrology is broadcasting and benevolently sharing knowledge. And this is, it's not taking the income of my peers, um, okay, because basically I don't give charity one-to-one readings. I tend to mundane astrology and things that, but also when it comes to like watch time, it's not something that is, um, that I'm fiscally benefiting from, which allows me to transmute the many things that the working people deal with only at the time of crisis, as the AI upcoming crisis um, that is going to permeate a lot of sectors. So Uranus, so Ketu in a certain placement is the purging of the physical manifestation of. Okay, so while I do have the spiritual teaching, the spiritual facet of a career, the actual career facet, um, and that allows me to act with more benevolence and non-attachment when it comes to being an astrologer in the form that I'm doing that, and that's unique, okay? Because and I don't seek for others to necessarily do me, and I don't seek to do any other but me, okay? But when it comes um, to the way I do things, and when it comes to Ketu being in Gemini, which is cities, twin cities, um, Uranus, which is technological, digital, and Saturn, which is both presence, depth, um, uh, um, walls, borders, but basically structures. So the digital structure, so the digital 15-minute city, and Mercury that rules Gemini is short time, and Saturn is restriction, and Gemini is transportation. But then we're going to have Ketu, which is basically going to bomb the structures there. Okay, that's basically the meaning of 2030, which kind of reminds us of the building of the ghettos in 1939 to 1941, and then the bombing of the ghettos. So those that are invested in such projects is kind of like the people that were invested in private equity. Um, some of them were even marketed as a Section 8, so they were thinking that they're investing in something that the government supports for like income-based housing, and ended up with their assets being flipped. This is because the United States, in its housing first, did not do housing for unlimited time without dependency on ability to work, and it would bring the people out of the housing after 9 months, and they had to kind of like, they were subjected to be trafficked if they wanted to stay housed. And so people bought assets, some of them even took loans to buy assets, and then they had their houses flipped by the very people that went through ritual abuse, and they would be making a big mess, okay? And this is because these people were tortured, and they were making a big mess, and then the people had to sell the house to flip the house, and then the same companies would go and offer to check the tenants. So, okay, it's basically a form of pain protection for the house. But to begin with, if people were renting because they couldn't have access to buy housing ever, this was something that kind of remind us of the people illegally cutting the trees. And when people think, why would somebody harm their oxygen? Well, that's the people that were so disconnected during ritual abuse that everything meant nothing, and those trees, if they were ritually abused in the forests, then definitely they would be um, cut off from the connection with the trees and the and even the younger generation that we see talking about climate depression, perhaps is reconnecting with the trees. Those of them that were not ritually abused in the forests are reconnecting with the trees. Um, and this is how both the people and the trees that had to energetically contain those rituals eventually were cut, not just legally, but also illegally. And we have a deforestation as a result of that ritual abuse and these types of wealth consolidation. Um, and that brings me to the second point. Another effect of ritual abuse, particularly when it happens in the framework of consultation, energy reading, channeling, astrology, is also, okay, the disconnect of people from people, and then the attempt to rely on AI because technology does not bring the trigger of humanity. And unfortunately or fortunately, I don't know, good thing, bad thing, who knows, we also had cases where people turned to AI for consultation and got psychosis, which probably has to do with them being targeted through other technologies and even dark cult, okay? Um, so um, then I ran into a case of astrology programs, and what's interesting about these astrology programs, they kind of promise the same thing that AI mental health consultation promised, and this is the benefits of astrology without having to consult a person. Um, Here are the things that it brings up. First of all, it brings up the issue that um, not having a person, okay, for example, when I use Peter's program, which is astrosig.com, it's not just that Peter, because the thing is, like, it's not like Peter is going to go over all of that, and what's he to do with that? He's got things to do. We all know Peter. He just wants to put a bonfire and watch the stars and cook some meal on that bonfire, and he doesn't even charge money for this program. It's his own endeavor, even when he doesn't receive donations, even because he has his job, and this is where we get the benefit of an astrology program, which is fantastic for beginner astrologers, but it's also quite comprehensive. And here is the thing. It's obvious that there is no encryption. Okay, even when and people think that if they consult a computer, that information is not visible to anyone, and it cannot be farther from the truth. Not just because of psychic readers and energy readers and whatnot, but also because the same issue, and the issue with consulting, let's say, a reader or an astrologer, is not just that this reader, what would that reader disclose information to that person? No, it is the fact that this line is in the air. It's a frequency that we cannot isolate uh, to provide any type of privacy. So for me, I grew up, my mother told me, what you don't want written in the world journals, don't speak and don't write even to yourself. And even thoughts are visible. Okay, so I grew up with this intense transparency. Okay, and to people that are not accustomed to that, it is incredibly challenging to move to the age of air. But from the client perspective, um, the good thing about AI is it can be like a hive mind, okay, and that is and the computational power that has. Um, Here is, and it is not that it's unbiased, it's just that it's technologically biased. And this is where, this is, for example, why when I broadcast, I open the chart of the beginning of the broadcast and I open with this perspective from which, okay? And of course, there is my chart, there is Peter's chart, there is the chart of the natal chart of the recipient. There's a natal chart of the people that are listening, and so on. Um, Now, here is another issue that rises that is also not unique to, let's say, AI astrology. And this is when I tried to Google who owns the company, there was no list. And the first thing is like, well, this is lack of transparency. And the second thing is that just like those are not registered, even in registered company, people run their companies through shell companies. And I really, really want to give a shout out to the currency historian. Wait a second, because here also we do not have an owner, we do not have a name to attach. We have information, and this is by um, there is history meets finance, the coin financials, okay, and those are again providing again the anonymity of the internet, and providing information. And this is good information. It doesn't take into account the occult, um, and the people that do take into account the occult have to do crimes. So I don't know what type of crime, and this is why. Okay, and this creates a challenge. Um, okay, because there is good innovation regarding to currency and the aspiration that currency will be without ritual abuse, but there is still the processes that were abusive, okay, that were ritual abuse on energy level, um, and this is something that still happens. But basically, around the issuing of currency, there's a lot of occultism involved, and about the essence is to take the creative energy, the life energy from the victims, and to harvest it and to create with that. And basically, this is also why there is a phenomenon worldwide of unregistered births. And when we come to both people escaping this line of crime, these are people that are stateless, that do not have a register, are not registered, and do not have an identity registered, which is both. There are a lot of people that don't register themselves to not comply with certain, okay, law of the sea, law of the land. Okay, the fact that ID is basically there are accounts or hidden accounts or hidden entire system that uses the identity of people or the registered identity. And basically, all of our rights are funded by the money that is done on the account of our identities, be without our knowing. And this basically means that that our rights are definitely funded and founded, but it is even more than that. It's the life energy. And this is where sexual sovereignty comes into play, because the ritual violates, basically, it rapes the infants and the children, and it violates the sexuality to create disconnect whether of the hemispheres, and basically bring everything to nothing and create program personalities, mind control, a web of connection, but that is under control and is decentralized, by the way. Okay, the heads of those type of organizations would be shifting, and shout out to Light for talking about that. So there would be a different person heading these type of communities um, each time. And here there is basically an issue where um, we can't follow the money, but also to tackle that, we need to tackle ritual abuse and the unregistered births, and the fact that to come out of, let's say, a person was born as unregistered, okay, for example, an invisible cloned person, which basically, okay, and that could be an elite person, and that could be an expandable child. Why am I saying Tesla? Nikola Tesla. I'm seeing Nikola Tesla. There's somebody has a joke that somebody was Nikola Tesla, and or that he's watching this. I don't know. Um, this particular identified him as is particularly Nikola Tesla, um, because with the cloning project we don't know who was who. Um, but this is interesting. Um, yeah. A part of the programming is when they ask the infants, "Do you know who you are?" And there is a summoning also of, I think, certain consciousnesses. I really don't know. Um, and this is also why they do the buried alive thingy, because a living person buried with a dead person, and it's kind of the transcendence of this, but this is not an initiation because it's done to children. Even when it's done to adults, okay, but it's not like a person is going through an initiation rite that they know what the rite is about and what's behind it, or they're going to have like the gnosis. Is that it's there is no, okay, that's ritual abuse. That's basically and it's also, I said, there's no such thing as ritual abuse. It's the abuse of ritual. And this is where there is an attempt to take the actions that people do and basically bring them to or plagiarize that creative energy into something that is, through active violence, um, creating something that is controlled and controlling, and is not, how should I say that? Is perpetuating trauma. Okay, and then the soul constantly wants to create cohesion. It also relates to the scientific theory of a big explosion, which unfortunately has to do with the rapes, and it affects the scientific paradigms because the fractured sense of self, or the not even formed sense of self, wants to create cohesion, and this is seen as the Godhead living through people, and actually people can barely tell the mimicry from the origin, but the fact that these things happened and the origin did not stop them from being is basically creating either a totally nihilistic or a very partial notion of divinity and connection. And we know that the recovery is connection and re-embodying the hemispheres. And by the way, the thing that we do to re-embody the hemispheres, which is the X crossing our hands and legs is actually the things that people do in those rituals of the buried alive, because basically it's how people are buried. And this is basically okay, and this is also where people have their consciousness traveling in different bodies that are all bodies of people that were tortured, and I guess that could pertain to phenomena of what people called skinwalkers. Um, and so the fact that those rituals were not stopped is basically allowing the destruction of everything. Um, and, and one of the first things I remember when there was a certain chart, I'm not gonna talk about it extensively, but I first saw that chart, I was like, there was this discussion about, the Luciferian vantage point, and I said, well, all of these horrors are done to supposedly wake humanity up. And I said, oh, but we are awakening. So we're not going to need to continue to do these horrors. And and this is awakening to the fact of ritual abuse. Um, and with the abuse, there is also the silencing, okay, which is the oaths that people take, and the use of secrecy to justify in the higher ranks um, sexual boundary violation, that is the essence of the mind control and the violation of sovereignty and the wealth consolidation over the land and its natural resources and over the air and the space and the everything. So becoming aware of that is also becoming aware that we can't follow the money, because what about those children that need to come out of being the unregistered births and partake in what would be the world and its economy and its society, in its documentation, in its, okay, we can think about stateless people, we can think about the identity theft and how the documentation is also, with Saturn Neptune, an intricate topic. People think about the Holocaust, okay, or the concentration camps, or also refugees that don't have, for example, when I was homeless in Netherlands, naturally I did not have back then even my passport with me. I had a picture of that, and then I also did not have my birth certificate, because my birth certificate was already given to issue the passport, and he could only contact the passport, even though it was biometric, they could only contact the passport, the first issuing of the passport, when I was 16, which is where all the registry documentation of my parents' marriage, and they needed the approval of my father, so that was where I originally got my passport, and that was the thing that they managed to access, and I had to call the embassy. Um, and so think about people that are not coming to their land of origin, or one of the lands of origins of the ancestors, and have no birth certificate, okay? Whereas people that escaped, and some of these people did escape through really, if I think about my father escaping through the forests, he was escaping a ghetto. He didn't have the means to liquidate some assets and start elsewhere in one of the, and usually it's for people that already have a summer house elsewhere, or um, access to international and global trade. And that is okay. I addressed that when I addressed the Rahu line and astrocartography and so on. Um, and and this is also where the fear of losing our employment sectors, okay, it's all the expansion of the wound of origin, which is the ritual abuse that people either did not hear about or really thought it was a conspiracy or were silent about. So, um, whatever the journey is, it is a telltale that to to understand that those things were done by violating sovereignty and sexual sovereignty. By violating sexual sovereignty, there was a violation of sovereignty, have mind control through violence and dissociation, and that was to take the creative energy, the life energy, and to manifest with that. We can also go back to the journey of Neptune in Pisces, where people just learn about the origin of their life energy, in Uranus in Taurus, where they learned about their Kundalini energy as the lower chakras, as being not this place to condemn, but a place to align, because this is the energy that generates our safety needs, whether it's, our real estate and so on and so forth. It's not for nothing that even when people think about modern phenomena as, let's say, OnlyFans and the rituals around porn, shout out to Seizure Girl regarding her great exposure of the porn industry. And yes, it is all trafficking. And the fact that the rituals of incubus and succubus, and from my contribution when I was working on my thesis proposal, then I was studying the body-mind question, and there was always a chapter 8, because one of the books that talk about the plasticity of the brain talked about sexuality in the brain, and how early sexual traumas are really embedded in the brain to a point where, even with the plasticity of the brain, it is difficult to change. And this is where there can be transmutation. There can be transmutation. It requires the transmutation of the very essence of ritual abuse and extortion cults. And this is something that requires us to honor our non-erotic needs as well. Some people connect to it through divine love, um, and then a re-embodiment of the sexuality and realignment, because our entire system changes and the world changes. Um, but also with the people that have sexual traumas, they are more susceptible to become addicted to porn, and even at young ages suddenly need more and more violence to cross the threshold of orgasm, and basically they're not coming on oxytocin but on dopamine, which becomes addiction to sex. And through that violence, I guess their life energy is harvested in a certain way. Um, but it also happens with the violent, some people that need violence, or people that use the rapport of the the sexuality, and then bring violence, which unfortunately I ran into as well while trying to recover um, my ability to have an orgasm that I enjoy before, during, and after. And that is the amount of attunement and attention and intention and the everythingness around that. And by the way, the people that have had their intentions fumbled with, it has to do with the root and crown chakra. So alignment of the crown chakra and the root chakra is something that I received from people that dealt with that as well. And salty lakes, okay, or salty seas, mineral seas, I noticed that they tend to be a place where a lot of that, I guess because of the richness of the minerals, um, there were a lot of attempts to control and to use this type of violent type of occult uses. And um, and this is also um, it is also a reminder that certain things are science, okay? Sexual sovereignty is non-negotiable for identity, like water is non-negotiable for the existence of life, okay? Um, and this is why with the people that were trafficked, which means that they either escaped this extortion cult into the trafficking, okay, or something of that sort, or went through tremendous type of trauma, where them, let's say, setting a boundary of a price or whatnot was pathway to their own sovereignty and deciding on themselves, because they had no access to the yes, no, and maybe. And there we see a lot of incubus and succubus behavior, because those are still the timelines of the ritual abuse. That's basically the issue. Um, and because it's so malefic, it's done to torture even children and have the child be the person that is supposed to plant urges in the minds of basically the tortured and trafficked adult. And that's why it works on them, because on people that were not particularly tortured, um, they're less likely to accept suggestion if that suggestion is not benefic to them, or they would accept something until it is benefic and then say no to the rest. And this is basically um, okay, a person that went through sexual boundary violation, but also the experience of being a child where even though it's very likely that I wasn't from like the physical ceremonies, um, okay, like at least I think my parent would know about that if that was, and yet they didn't know about other things that happened to me. So, but the thing is that um, definitely there was work done on me since an infant, that's for sure. But how should I say that? The experience of walking the world as a child that feels like they have um, how should I say that? That the child has sexual power over adults. Okay? And and it was something that was also, um, when I went to psychodynamic psychotherapy, um, something that came up with me being the child, and the therapist saying that my sexuality has power over them, or what the extent of power it has over them. And I'm like, well, but aren't you sexual too? Like, what's the issue with, like, why does that have power over, where we're both sexual beings? And um, it was very weird to me, particularly because he used his sexual power to try to tap into my astral field, which, by the way, happened when I was with myself and did not know. Um, and then I felt something was not me, and then I talked to that person, which was my psychologist when I was his patient. Okay, so and um, and then the whole world was so, why am I getting convoluted? Um, that was kind of like the only source of um, trying to decipher something in the world, because the old structures that were extremely hierarchical were not working for me. And then this supposed lack of hierarchy, um, perhaps was the only pathway to talk about patient sovereignty, and the importance of patient sovereignty, and yet also the challenge of um, children needing parental figures, needing to meet their naturally non-erotic needs. The confusion that it can definitely bring about in even the most well-trained of therapists. So that was adding to the confusion, and the fact that ritual abuse is programming also the people that would be therapist consultants, okay, and even astrologers. So um, and yes, my life was later threatened, and he was basically mind controlled by something or someone, and under this, and then basically I would have a situation where healthcare personnel is going into um, what looks like a psychosis state, and me, the patient, has to run for my life, not really being able to tell the story, obviously, and even him telling me, but I cannot speak, which basically probably means that he was in some sort of a secret society and couldn't speak, and that was bringing up all these things. um, and yep, don't know how he got to my astral field. And I felt that was orchestrated way before I met the person in the physical. Um, and so there's definitely, it happened after I did a satire about what I now know is the extortion cults. um, Convoluted, extremely complicated, intricate, and difficult to understand. Yes, it can describe things like arguments, explanations, or plots that are complex and hard to follow. Physical objects that are twisted and coiled. The word comes from Latin root to roll up, suggesting something that is tangled or looped back on itself. Now, here's the thing. That person was constantly trying to get me to word things. Now, of course, people that were harmed in that way, there is a wound. Chiron Geminis. Okay, there's a wound around speech, and and then when I would word things, there would be kind of like the lower astral trying to take these words